Nina Patel lay flat on her living room floor, arms spread like a fallen starfish, eyes wide open in the dark. It was a Friday night, but there were no plans, no texts buzzing in, no one waiting. Just her thoughts. Loud, sharp, endless. You ruined everything. He left because you're not enough. They're all moving on. Look at you. After losing her job and separating from her husband within 6 months, Nina thought the worst was over. But this constant inner storm, was something else. She wasn't crying. She wasn't yelling. She was just sinking. Slowly, silently, under the weight of every unspoken word in her head. The scariest part? She believed it all. In that moment, Nina wasn't just thinking. She was drowning in the belief that her thoughts were the truth, that they were her, that there was no escape. But there is a quiet shift that begins when we ask one strange, powerful question. What if everything I'm thinking right now isn't actually real? This isn't a story about fixing your thoughts. It's about seeing them clearly for the first time and realizing you don't have to believe everything your mind tells you. Not anymore. For weeks after that night on the floor, Nina drifted through her days like someone underwater. Conversations felt distant. Even her own voice, when she spoke aloud, sounded foreign, like it belonged to someone else. Her inner world had become louder than the real one, and every thought seemed to carry the weight of absolute truth. You're falling behind. You were the problem in the marriage. Nobody's calling because they don't care. She kept trying to push the thoughts away, distract herself with Netflix or endless scrolling, but nothing worked for long. The thoughts returned like fog, seeping into every corner of her mind. One day, while trying to meditate with a YouTube video she barely heard, Nina caught her reflection in the dark screen. She looked exhausted. Not from working too much, but from thinking too much. That Sunday, an old college friend, Daniel, reached out. He had seen one of her posts on Instagram, something cryptic about disappearing, and asked if she wanted to meet up for tea. Nina hesitated. She hadn't seen Daniel in over a decade, but she agreed. They met at a quiet park in Austin, where the sun filtered gently through the oak trees. He had the same gentle smile she remembered, but now there was something steadier about him. He moved slowly, purposefully, as if even his silence had roots. After some small talk, she opened up. I'm spiraling, she admitted, avoiding eye contact. Every day I hear this voice in my head, and I believe it. I know it's just thoughts, but it feels real, and I can't get it to stop. Daniel looked at her, nodded, and said softly, What if the problem isn't the thoughts, but the belief that they're true? She blinked. But they are true. Are they? He asked. Or are they just loud? There was a pause. She wanted to dismiss the question, but something about the calm in his tone made her stop. He told her about something he'd been practicing, an insight from Buddhist psychology called citta vipassana, or awareness of the mind's movements. In this tradition, thoughts are seen as events, not facts. They come and go like weather, but we mistake them for identity. I used to think I was my thoughts, Daniel said, but now I watch them like birds flying across the sky. I don't need to catch them. I just notice. It sounded beautiful, even poetic, but Nina felt skeptical. That sounds like something a calm person says. I'm not that. He laughed gently. Neither was I, but here's what helped. When a thought arises, I say to myself, thinking. That's it. No judgment, no story, just labeling it, like noting a passing cloud. Later that evening, back at home, Nina tried it. Sitting cross-legged on a blanket, She set a timer for 5 minutes and closed her eyes. At first, it felt ridiculous. Her mind immediately launched into its usual barrage. This is pointless. You're wasting time. You're still broken. But this time, instead of following the thoughts, she said quietly in her head, thinking. Another one came. This won't work. She labeled again, thinking. Over and over, the same drill. A thought surfaced, she labeled it, and returned to her breath. She wasn't trying to believe or disbelieve the thoughts. She was simply watching. And something strange began to happen. The thoughts kept coming, but they began to lose their sharpness. They didn't land the same way. By the end of 5 minutes, Nina wasn't healed, but she felt a sliver of space, a tiny gap between the thought and her. That space became her refuge. She returned to the practice every morning for the next week. Sometimes for 5 minutes, sometimes just 2. But the effect built slowly. She started to recognize the familiar patterns, how her mind repeated the same stories. You'll be alone forever. You're not enough. She realized her thoughts were like bad reruns, predictable, repetitive, and exhausting. And yet, she'd been believing them as gospel. The shift wasn't sudden. But each time she named a thought instead of becoming it, she reclaimed a little power, a little peace. One afternoon, scrolling through old text messages from her ex, she felt the ache again. That urge to analyze, to replay the breakup frame by frame. But this time, instead of diving into the spiral, she whispered, thinking. Then she put the phone down and went outside. It was a small victory, but it was real. What Nina was beginning to discover was something foundational in both Buddhist thought and modern psychology. Thoughts are not reality. They are representations, filtered through our past, our pain, our fear. The Buddha never taught that we should suppress our minds, but that we should see them clearly. In the Satipatthana Sutta, the Buddha says, when a thought arises, one knows. This is a thought. That's it. Not fixing. Not fighting. Just knowing. Clarity, in this view, isn't the absence of thought. It's the ability to see it without being swallowed by it. Nina's world didn't change overnight. Her job didn't come back. Her ex didn't apologize. But her relationship with her own mind, that began to shift. And for the first time in months, she felt the faint outline of something she hadn't felt in a long time. Agency. The power to choose what she gave her attention to. The space to exist without believing every cruel whisper in her head. The possibility that maybe, just maybe, she was never broken. Just listening to the wrong narrator. Nina kept practicing. Morning after morning, just 5 minutes of sitting quietly, labeling thoughts as they arose. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't always peaceful. But it was steady. The more she practiced, the more she noticed patterns. Certain phrases always came up when she felt tired. Others when she was alone too long. And some, those dark, self-blaming ones, surfaced like clockwork anytime she tried to feel hopeful. One afternoon, while journaling, she decided to write down her most frequent thoughts. Within 10 minutes, she had a full page. Nearly all of them were harsh, absolute, and punishing. You're unlovable. You're too old to start over. Nothing you do matters. Reading them back, she felt a rush of anger, not at herself this time, but at how long she'd let this inner narrative run unchecked. These thoughts had shaped how she walked into rooms, how she talked to people, even how she looked in the mirror, and none of them had ever been questioned. That evening, during a virtual mindfulness group, Nina met Karen, a 57-year-old former schoolteacher from Michigan. Karen had joined the group after losing her husband to COVID. She spoke with a kind of soft fatigue, as if every sentence cost her something. "I still hear his voice," Karen said, eyes damp, looking straight into the webcam. "But I also hear this other voice, this one that says, 'You don't deserve to be here. Why did you survive and not him?' And some days, I believe it." Nina felt her throat tighten. That voice, she knew it. Different words, same poison. After the session, Nina messaged Karen privately. They began meeting twice a week, not to fix each other, but to hold space. They'd light candles, sit for 10 minutes in silence, then journal. No analysis, no pressure, just two people learning to watch their own minds with gentleness. Through these sessions, Nina learned something deeper. That the mind doesn't lie because it's evil. It lies because it's afraid. It tries to protect, to predict, to control. But in doing so, it turns pain into identity. From a Buddhist perspective, this is called moha, delusion. Not just ignorance in the casual sense, but a kind of spiritual blindness. When we mistake thoughts for truth, we become trapped in delusion. And yet, delusion isn't permanent. It dissolves in the presence of awareness. Daniel later introduced Nina to another concept, anatta, or not self. In Buddhist teaching, there's no fixed, solid me inside our heads, just a collection of experiences, habits, memories, and yes, thoughts. The trouble begins when we cling to those thoughts as if they define us. "You're not the voice in your head," Daniel reminded her. "You're the one who hears it." This shift in perspective was slow, but profound. One day, Nina received an email from a company she'd applied to. They were going with someone else. The old voice rose up immediately. "You're just not good enough." But this time, she caught it. Instead of spiraling, she wrote the thought down and added a question. Is this true? Or is this just familiar? She realized something. The thought wasn't based on facts. It was based on fear. The mind had simply reached for the most practiced story, so she wrote a new one. "I didn't get this job. That's disappointing. But it doesn't mean I'm unworthy. It just means not yet." It wasn't about positivity or pretending. It was about seeing clearly, about pausing long enough to ask whether the mind was speaking from truth or from habit. Nina's daily life didn't become perfect. She still had moments of doubt, anxiety, even despair. But now, those moments didn't swallow her. She could witness them, respond instead of react. She also started to recognize how many people around her were silently at war with their own thoughts. Her sister, who constantly apologized for everything. Her neighbor, who checked her locks 5 times before leaving the house. A friend who never felt smart enough, despite holding a PhD. Everyone, it seemed, was carrying an invisible narrator, and most of those narrators were cruel. Nina began to wonder. What would happen if more people knew they didn't have to listen? During one of her calls with Karen, the older woman shared a line that stayed with her. "Sometimes," Karen said, "I think healing is just learning to live with your mind instead of under it." That night, Nina wrote those words on a sticky note and placed it on her bathroom mirror. Over time, her relationship with her thoughts softened. She didn't need them to go away. She just needed to remember that they weren't her. They were clouds, and she was the sky. And in that spaciousness, something unexpected began to grow. Compassion, not just for herself, but for others. For all the people walking around believing their most painful thoughts. For all the minds trying to protect hearts the only way they knew how. She still got anxious before interviews, still had dreams about her ex, still heard the inner critic, especially on lonely nights. But now she'd place a hand over her heart and whisper, "Just a thought. It will pass. And it always did. Thoughts are not the enemy. They're just not the whole story. They are echoes, not evidence. Noise, not identity. Weather, not the sky. And the moment we begin to see that, truly see it, is the moment we begin to get free. Weeks turned into months. Nina wasn't better, not in the way the world tends to measure recovery. But something in her had quietly shifted. Like the ground beneath her was no longer quicksand, but soil. Unsteady, still soft in places, but enough to stand on. What surprised her most wasn't the silence of her thoughts. It was their persistence. They still came. On cold mornings, in the middle of emails, while brushing her teeth. But now, instead of reacting, she had a relationship with them. They were no longer commanders. They were visitors. There's a phrase from the Buddhist monk Ajahn Chah. Try to let go, but if you can't let go, let it be. Nina began to understand what that meant. She didn't need to force her thoughts away. She didn't need to win against them. She could just stop trying to become every thought that floated by. That, in itself, was liberation. One morning, during her sitting practice, a particularly brutal thought arose. You'll always be alone. The old Nina would have believed it, would have run with it, scrolling through old pictures, searching for validation, texting someone just to not feel invisible. But this Nina just labeled it thinking. Then she smiled. That smile was important. It wasn't defiance or denial. It was recognition. It was the kind of smile you give a toddler throwing a tantrum. You don't hate them for it. You don't take it personally. You just know they're overwhelmed. This was a kind of inner reparenting, a softness, and it changed how she lived. When she walked into interviews now, she no longer felt the need to perform confidence. She simply noticed her nerves, acknowledged the fear-driven thoughts. You're not what they want, and returned to her breath. Not to get rid of the thought, but to anchor herself in something more stable than the mind, the body, the moment. She also became more curious. Instead of asking, "How do I stop these thoughts?" she began asking, "Where do they come from?" Not just psychologically, but systemically. Because the truth is, Nina hadn't created these thoughts alone. They were shaped by years of messaging, from childhood wounds, cultural expectations, social media comparisons, broken relationships. The inner critic wasn't born in her. It was handed to her. And once she saw that, she could stop taking it so personally. This realization brought her to a deeper teaching of Buddhism, the principle of dependent origination, that nothing arises in isolation. Every thought has a cause. And when we understand that cause, we can stop seeing ourselves as flawed and start seeing ourselves as conditioned. Understanding this didn't erase the pain, but it made space for compassion. Not just for herself, but for others. Her father, who had always told her to toughen up. He had been raised to believe feelings were weakness. Her ex-husband, who often shut down in conflict, he had learned to equate vulnerability with danger. Everyone, it seemed, was carrying a mind full of ghosts. When she understood that, forgiveness came, not as a grand gesture, but as a quiet unbinding. She started sharing pieces of her journey online. Not advice, just reflections, stories, observations. She posted one short clip about labeling thoughts during an anxiety spiral, and within days, hundreds of messages poured in. I thought I was the only one who thought like that. I've never heard anyone describe it that way. Thank you. This makes me feel less crazy. That last one stuck with her. Less crazy, because that's what it is, isn't it? We don't need a diagnosis to feel like we're broken. The mind, left unchecked, makes even the sanest among us feel fragmented. But when we learn to see thoughts clearly, we stop fearing them. We stop believing they define us. And in that clarity, even the most painful thoughts lose their power. Nina and Karen continued their weekly meetings. Some days were quiet, some emotional, some filled with unexpected laughter. One evening, Karen shared something she had written. "My thoughts told me I was too late, but I think I'm right on time." They both cried. By now, Nina had memorized her breath. It was her refuge, her compass. Inhale. Here. Exhale. Now. Over and over until her pulse slowed and her body softened. This wasn't a technique. It was a way of returning to something deeper than identity or success or perfection. Returning to presence. Because in the end, healing wasn't about becoming someone new. It was about remembering who she was before the thoughts took over. The part of her that had always been here. Quiet, aware, untouched by the storms of the mind. She still had setbacks, still felt pangs of fear, waves of grief. But now those waves didn't drag her under. She had learned to float. And in that floating, something else emerged. Joy. Not loud joy, not performative happiness, but the quiet joy of drinking tea without checking her phone. The joy of hearing birds at sunrise, of saying no without guilt, of resting without justification, of realizing she no longer needed to earn peace, just to allow it. That's the thing about thoughts. They'll keep coming. The mind will keep chattering. But the space around the thoughts, the awareness that sees them, that holds them gently, that space is always free. And in that freedom, Nina didn't become someone new. She simply came home. Nina never stopped having thoughts. That wasn't the point. The storm never completely vanished. But her relationship to it did. What once felt like a drowning undertow had become background noise, like wind brushing against windows. She could hear it, even feel it, but she no longer mistook it for danger. There's a quiet kind of strength that forms when you realize you don't have to believe everything your mind says. It doesn't come with fireworks or applause. It shows up in small, ordinary moments. The way you speak to yourself when no one's listening. The way you pause before reacting. The way you forgive yourself before waiting for someone else to do it. She learned that peace doesn't mean a quiet mind. It means becoming the one who can sit quietly with a noisy mind. That's where the freedom is. And you, if you've ever sat alone with a racing mind, if you've ever believed the harsh voice telling you you're not enough, this is your reminder. You are not your thoughts. You are the one who notices them. And in that noticing, you've already begun to come home to yourself. So here's a small practice. If you're ready, sit for 2 minutes today. Close your eyes. Feel your breath. When a thought arises, don't follow it. Don't fight it. Just say, thinking, then return to your breath. Again and again, gently. You don't need to silence your mind to find peace. You just need to stop letting it be the only voice in the room. If this resonated with you, there's more. In the next video, we'll explore how to move through loneliness, not by escaping it, but by befriending it. Because sometimes solitude isn't something to survive, it's something sacred. Until then, may you meet your mind with softness. And may you remember, you're not broken, you're just beginning to see clearly. There's something almost revolutionary about sitting quietly and noticing your own thoughts, not judging them, not chasing them, not trying to make them prettier, just seeing, just being. Because we live in a world that constantly tells us to do more, fix more, become more. But what if healing isn't about becoming anything new? What if it's about remembering that who you are, beneath all the noise, was never the problem? Thoughts will come. Some will be kind. Many won't. But every time you pause and see a thought for what it is, a passing cloud, you reclaim a little more space inside yourself. And in that space, something soft begins to bloom. Awareness, compassion, calm. Maybe peace doesn't arrive in big, dramatic moments. Maybe it shows up in small decisions. The choice to breathe instead of react, to rest instead of spiral, to stay instead of run. If nothing else, let this linger in you. You are not the storm. You are the sky that holds it. And that sky, it's always been there, steady, vast, and waiting for you to notice.